Hello, welcome to the From Way Downtown Pacers podcast. I'm IndyStar Pacers editor Nat Newell here, of course, with our Pacers insider Dustin Dopirak. Pacers are advancing in the playoffs for the first time in 10 years. It's kind of shocking to me to hear that since my first 2 years as the Pacers editor were those 2 years they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then it got very different, and actually not. It got a little bit different as gradually as they got worse and worse after that. But it's great to see the Pacers advancing again. Wanted to do a little bookkeeping first, I guess. Buddy Hield did not play great for the 76ers. You and I were both, against the trade, certainly, Buddy Hield to the Sixers at the trade deadline. Looked like we were wrong, I guess, when Buddy Hield stopped playing for the 76ers. But then last night, the Sixers get down by 19 or whatever it was. They put Buddy Hield in, and he turns into Buddy Hield and scored 17 in the first half, brought them all the way back. They still lost. I should have gone back and got the clip, but I'm sure I said when we were talking about it, one of the reasons you keep Buddy Hield is because his shooting can win you a playoff game. We almost saw that last night. But again, just wanted to say, sure, it was not that I thought either of us ever said it was going to be some crushing blow.
Right.
I think I think the Pacers would still be a better team with Buddy Hield than Doug McDermott.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. At the end of the day, I mean, Doug McDermott's been able to come in and hit a couple shots. I mean, I think after game one, everybody was ready to just bury him entirely and say, like, don't let me see that guy again. I mean, when I say everybody, I mean the fan base, and particularly the fan base that shows up in my Twitter mentions, was basically like, hey, like, I don't want to see Doug McDermott take another step on that floor. And I even kind of said at the time, like, you say that now, but there's going to be a moment like where you're going to be like that you need Doug McDermott. And there were a couple. I mean, he did hit a couple threes, I think, at some important times, basically when they were trying to, bust the Bucks out of zones, and he was able to do that. And so, like, there's still value there in having that guy who just comes in for a few minutes and just breaks you out of what you want to do and sort of forces you to spread out a little bit more and just makes everything else easier to work. And maybe just hit some 3-pointers that get you a bunch of points fast, which is certainly what the 3-pointer does. And so, I still think that they would be better if they had a guy who was a more efficient volume shooter, both for just the points he'd be able to produce, the gravity. I still think that there are ways in which there's that Tyrese Haliburton's job has been continuously harder and different because he hasn't had Buddy Hield there to just create gravity. There would be some things that would be shaken up and being a little bit different. I think that we shouldn't dismiss. I mean, I think, Ben Shepherd has gotten real minutes and been able to grow up quickly. And, he doesn't have big scoring numbers or whatever in this series, but he hit a couple big threes. And I think that his defense has been really good. I think, especially after game one, game one, he looked a little bit lost, but really since then, you've seen what you wanted to see out of Ben Shepherd. And if you still had Buddy Hield on the roster, you don't know what kind of minutes that would have taken away. So I think he's grown up a lot. I mean, I think, it's obviously odd to, take your rookie, the one that you picked later in the draft. The 26th pick is the guy who's getting the minutes, and that you're putting him in that kind of tough position, and he's in even the shortened rotation. But you need to have a wing guy who can defend. Basically they can come off the bench and take minutes like that. That's not one that you can go hide somebody and just play TJ and, Obi Toppin and that be it. I mean, you need to be able to stick a guy in there that can kind of guard those 2-3 positions. And Ben Shepherd's done that really well. So the Hield thing would have shaken that up a little bit. But it would have been nice, I think, for them in this series to have a more reliable off the bench shooter and more reliable sort of, movement off the ball, doesn't have to have the ball in his hands very much shooter. It would have been something valuable for them, down the stretch, in the regular season, but also in these playoffs.
The other thing I just want to touch on, I mean, obviously, Giannis doesn't play in the entire series. Dame Lillard misses several games. To me, that takes nothing away from this. The Pacers won 4 out of the 5 games during the regular season. If Giannis plays, is it a different series? Obviously, it's a different series. Right. But for, and I haven't seen a ton of this. But for anyone out there who wants to think that the Pacers got lucky or whatever, I mean, sure they did, but I think they've earned this playoff win regardless of who played and who didn't play for the Bucks.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say to kind of just put it in, pure perspective is that the roster that includes Damian Lillard and Chris Middleton playing at the height of his powers. Let's be serious.
Yeah, like got healthy for this series. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Height of his powers is a weird way to say that, but like this was vintage Chris Middleton. Like this was the guy who was, a multi-time All-Star, Olympian, gold medalist, like this was that Chris Middleton. You haven't seen that Chris Middleton in a while. So a lineup that includes Lillard and Middleton and Lopez and Portis and Malik Beasley and Pat Beverly is a playoff team. And so they won a playoff series. Where I would, kind of take it down a notch is that a team that has all those guys healthy and Giannis is a title contender. So they didn't, you can't mark this up as a dramatic upset. This isn't like knocking off the Milwaukee team at the beginning of the year that you think, okay, that's the team that's going to challenge Boston. Like it's 1-2 and it's everybody else after that. Like you didn't beat that Milwaukee team. So
they didn't beat that Milwaukee team now. They beat them in the regular season, however.
They did. They did. But that's still not the same. So like, I mean, like if in a world where the Milwaukee Bucks are in April, what we thought they were going to be in October and November, if you beat that team, like that's a dramatic upset win. Like that is seismic. That is, shifting the plates of the playoffs. If you came in imagining that Milwaukee was going to go toe to toe with Boston, in the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Pacers knocked that team off, then we're talking about a wow. Like that's like the Pacers are the team that everybody is talking about, and this isn't that. So I mean, like I guess it has to be sort of put in perspective in that way that you didn't shock anybody here, but like beating that team in a best of 7 is still winning a real playoff series. Like you didn't, like I saw, jokes on Twitter, like, oh, you beat the Wisconsin Herd. That's not this. Damian Lillard was still on that team. Damian Lillard still played 4 out of 6, and scored 35, a couple of those. I mean, he wasn't even great last night, and he still had 29, 28,
28. But yeah,
I mean, so you still faced a really good Damian Lillard, and like teams that have had their best players, Damian Lillard, in the past, have been troubled. Like how much worse was this group than some of the Portland teams that Damian Lillard was on? Like you won they won a real playoff series. There's not, the way I put it in my story today was nobody's putting an asterisk on, beating this team and saying, well, that's not a real playoff series. It is just not the same as beating a team with a top 5 player in the world. Like Giannis is, no matter how conservative you want to be about it, a top 5 player in the world. You even throw, Joker there in the top, Luka, Embiid, and if you want to be real generous, you can throw, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in there. But Giannis is there. And so it's a different team, and in the playoffs, it's a different scenario than beating them in the regular season. So it is not the shocking upset that it would have been if you imagine Milwaukee at full strength with Giannis playing like an MVP caliber player. That would have been one of those upsets that are like, wow, the Pacers beat those Bucks. Like everybody look out. But this is still winning a real playoff series. This is probably more like beating a 4 or 5 seed, but it's beating a real playoff team.
All right. Well, let's now that they what did we learn from this series? I mean, we talked before this that the Pacers have exceeded their goals this year. I don't think whatever happens against the Knicks, then you can't be disappointed in this season.
Sure.
But
no.
What have we learned about this Pacers team? What does this series win mean to the franchise?
It says, I mean, one, I think the most important reason that they just wanted to get in, more than anything else, was to get in, is because that experience that you get when you play in these, you're seeing a different style of basketball, you're seeing a different level of intensity, and you're seeing, what they all kept saying, the guys that had been there before kept saying, is like, you guys don't realize how much every possession matters, and you have to get yourself in that mindset, and that takes a while, and they just had to take that step. They just had to figure out who they were when they were thrown into that crucible, and figure out what that they needed to be, to get as far as they want to go eventually. And regardless of what happened, they were going to learn something about themselves, and that was going to be, important. And so just getting in was going to be something they could take forward. And I think, they learned that they're probably, maybe they're not a title contending team yet. I guess we're about to find out really in, this series, and if they manage to get past it, the next one, how close or how far they are away from being a real title contender. But, they prove they're a team that belongs, at this level, that they, that they can be thrown into that fire and, sort of, prosper within it, I guess. They had their, game one, oh my God, moment where that first half they were just completely jittery and just deer in the headlights look, and then they got over it. And they got, even in the second half, you just saw a sign of like, okay, they've found their sea legs here. And then game 2, they managed to win in Milwaukee. And that changes the tenor of the series right there. Basically is that you go from game 1 to game 2, take all the lessons you learn in game 1, apply them immediately, get a road win, put yourself, flip by basically home court advantage. And then you go home, win them both. And all of a sudden you're in total control, and then still managed to blow game 5 and, blow an opportunity there and shake that off. And I think it says a lot about the mettle of this team. It says something about, I think they had a benefit in being young. There was, challenges, obstacles in terms of, getting into game 1 and not knowing what you're in for, and then getting into game 5 and not knowing how to close a team out. But the fact that they hadn't been there before, I think served them well in game 6, because, they didn't have, they hadn't had a previous series where they went up 3-1 and blew it. So they didn't have that, oh my God, here we go again moment. They were just like, we've lost games before, let's not freak out because it's the playoffs. Let's not make it different and bigger than it is. Let's not make it feel like they're about to steal this one away from us. Let's just play basketball the way that we know how. And they did. And it just seemed like, their whole tenor, just the way that they processed that game 5 loss was, I think, so similar to how they processed so many other, losses. I mean, like they've been, you can certainly tell when you go into their locker room when they lose that they're bothered, but they're not devastated, like they're capable of being like, all right, it happened. That was stupid. We messed up, we screwed up today. And they'll tell you like, we need to grow up. We did this wrong. We did that wrong. We didn't compete the way that we should compete. We need to grow up, like all those kinds of things. But not dwell on them and not sit in the idea of like, oh my God, we blew such an important opportunity. And now Lillard's going to be back. And like, that's going to change the series. And like, they don't get that mindset, like the bottom is going to fall out. And so that's how you saw it in game 5, as much as they were like, we screwed this up, and we clearly screwed this up. They were just like, like we get them back at home. We have another opportunity. This was not us. This was trash. We can move on. We've moved on before, the loss at Brooklyn wasn't us. The loss at Toronto wasn't us. The loss at Portland wasn't us. The loss of the Wizards wasn't us. And, after those games, we showed that. And so we can do it again. And that's what we did, just kind of what they did. And I guess it speaks to their, the way that they're maturing. They're not mature yet, like they're still inconsistent. You still, was still like, like they can't string 4 great games together in a row. They're not going to sweep anybody because they're just not built that way to be that consistent and maintain that level all throughout and put their foot on somebody's throat from the beginning of the series to the end and just end it. Like they're going to, they're still at a point where they're going to have a mess up, that they're going to have a lull. They're going to have a stretch where they look like they forgot how to play basketball, but they're capable of recovering from that quickly and not letting one loss turn into 2.
Yeah, I mean, it's like life. Whatever your strength is, your weakness usually comes from that, and I think that's true for this team.
It is.
You would really love to have some sense from them that they knew Game 5 was super important because Lillard and Giannis could have come back in the next game, and you throw that away. But like you said, I mean, heck, maybe they would have beaten them with Giannis and Lillard out there. I mean, that's just who they are.
Right.
And well, let's move forward in terms of the Knicks. The Pacers won the season series against the Knicks. The Knicks, obviously, both and the Pacers made significant moves during the season. Pacers are still without Benedict Mathurin, obviously. Knicks are without Julius Randle, so that kind of cancels out. Jalen Brunson has gone from a really nice player to, I don't know, the 3rd best guard in the NBA. He's been playing everyone 45 minutes. Josh Hart doesn't want to ever come to Indiana, so that'll be a fun conversation to have with him.
Yes.
What are your feelings heading into this series?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously the Knicks come in a really good place. I mean, Jalen Brunson has been absolutely fantastic at playing just an incredible amount of grit. And it's just like you said, I mean, he is taking a serious leap. And I think it's going to be an interesting, matchup. We're talking about the two guys that were, the point guards on Team USA, last summer, Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Haliburton. Those guys seemed to become really close during that period. But Brunson was the guy. There was a lot of people who said maybe that Haliburton should have started, and Haliburton ends up being the guy who's chosen for the Olympic team. And I think it was in part because Haliburton maybe fits that backup point guard role better, just as a pure distributor, and Brunson is more of a guy that can get his own, and that might make him more capable of really carrying a team. But I think Brunson's playing just fantastic basketball, and he's just been tremendous. And obviously, Haliburton is not going to guard him. No way, no how. That's going to be Andrew Nembhard's assignment, presumably. And so that is going to be an interesting one. I mean, Nembhard, for as many points as Lillard scored, I thought Nembhard did valiant work in this series, and he had I think. I used it in the story, and then Rick Carlisle used it right after me that it is thankless. That guarding Damian Lillard is thankless, and Nembhard did a really good job of getting burned and then keeping after it and not letting that feel like, oh my God, this guy has my number and he's just crushing me today and I can't do anything to stop him. Like, Nembhard never backed down in that entire series, and I presume that this is going to be the same way if he guards Jalen Brunson. But still, Brunson's fantastic, and Brunson can get you. Brunson can out-muscle you too. Like, Lillard can kind of do that. And Lillard's a better, I think Lillard's a better outside shooter and more of a killer from there. But like, Brunson can just find a way to get to his spot in that mid-range or get to the rim or whatever. And he is a physical guard, and he's just a tough guy to deal with. So like, that's obviously where it starts, but DiVincenzo, obviously the guy who can really burn you from outside. Josh Hart was shooting really well in this series, and he's certainly a good hustle player. And the biggest difference, I think, between, the Knicks that they saw in the regular season and this one is I don't think they had to play OG. On that team, and he certainly changes a lot of what he can do, just what he can do defensively. He's going to be, I presume, he's going to be defending his old teammate, Pascal Siakam. And that is going to be a show, big time. What that's going to be like. OG has been just terrific, just on the ball defense, off the ball defense. Made some really, I think, game changing plays. I think even down the stretch in Game 5 that they lost, Anunoby had some big time stuff, and so that he really brings together Tibbs' entire way of playing basketball, and just having a guy with just a lot of defensive tenacity plus length plus athleticism, allows the Knicks to really play the, just really gritty style of defense that they can play. And so you're going to see it be very difficult for the Pacers to get out and do what they want to do on offense, because the way those guys are going to defend.
Brunson's fascinating because you did a story looking at Tyrese Haliburton's All-NBA chances towards the end of the season, and you wrote it and we posted it, and we had Brunson in there. And it was clear even at that time that Brunson was higher than Haliburton on the list, but it was a conversation you could have about two of them. Yeah. By the time that thing ran in print, which was maybe 10 days after we posted it, it was like, Brunson probably shouldn't be in here because it's
stone cold lock.
Team. It's very clear he's the second team guard. So anyone who had that questions about Dustin's story, it was really my fault, not his. But it's amazing how far
happens, man. It's different these days. It's different these days. But Brunson's a stone cold All-NBA lock.
Yeah, I think for second team, it's not even. It's not third team that we're talking about anymore.
Right, and even though it's positionless, like if there were still positions, yeah, he's second team guard. He's second team guard.
He carried the Knicks to 50 wins, and he scored. But again, obviously he was really good all year, and then he took a step forward, and if anything, he's taken it another step forward in the playoffs, drawing the Bernard King comparisons. And anyone younger than me probably needs to look up Bernard King, but one of the great post-up players of all time. He played in the 80s, blew out his knee, and wasn't quite the same. But we'll go. Again, does the regular season mean anything with the Pacers winning 2 out of 3 because of OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam?
It means something because I think everything that tells the Pacers at each level that these guys are not too big for you matters. Obviously they had, I think, more confidence coming in because they had taken 4 out of 5 from the Bucks. That did matter. I think that absolutely did matter, that they had beaten them 4 out of 5 times and they didn't have to play Giannis. There was just like, we've done this. Like, we have no reason to be afraid of these guys. And so I think, that is, I think, a big advantage for the Pacers throughout, because, they're not going to play anybody they haven't beat, because they beat everybody in the East this year. Every single team they beat at least once. And, most of the big teams, most of the ones that you would have come into this thinking these are title contenders, they beat at least twice. And that includes the Boston Celtics. So, that is a big deal for them, no matter, where they go. At the end of the day, if they pull this series off, I think it's possible for them to pull this series off. I don't think they're beating Boston if they get them, but they have beat them twice. They're not going to go into that series thinking these are the untouchable Boston Celtics and we have no chance and we should just pack it up and go home right now, or just, expect to take our 4 beatings and that be the end of it. They have won enough to not fear anybody. And so that is an advantage. That doesn't guarantee them anything. They can get their doors blown off in 4 games. It can happen, but they don't have reason to go into the Garden and be like, oh my God, it's the Garden. We can't possibly win there. We can't beat these teams. Jalen Brunson is way too good for us to touch. They don't have reason to enter this series with that kind of fear, or any series that they play in the East.
I really think to me, it's going to come down to sort of the pace. Can the Pacers play at their pace? The Knicks don't play a lot of players. So if they can get it up and down, that's going to be a problem for the Knicks.
Sure.
Now, the problem, of course, is that the pace always slows down in the playoffs. We just saw that the pace they played against the Bucks was significantly slower than they played in the regular season. It still worked to their advantage. I don't know how you can answer this, but what do you think their odds are of being able to speed up the Knicks or play at something between, basically at least play at the pace they were playing against the Bucks?
Yeah, I think, it's going to be harder. It's going to be slower than it was. Obviously their approach to that question is, I think, just sort of the obvious one, which is, well, we'll play as fast as we can. We're not going to, say that, okay, well, this playoffs are slower, ergo, we're going to embrace the slower pace. They're like, no, we're going to play as fast as we can. We're going to take every opportunity to run, and we're going to push. And so, and however many possessions that leads to, and however many points that leads to, whatever, we'll take that, but we're not going to say, okay, well, if we can't do that, we better walk it up. They're not going to do it. They're going to push off and made baskets. And I thought that they were able to get a lot done even last night doing that. I think that's, a real weapon that speaks to their persistence and their desire to run. Is it doesn't have to be a long defensive rebound or a steal or something like that, where they get a free reign, fast break where nobody's there. It's, off a made basket when you're still, looking at your, sideline and, doing some kind of gesture to the bench or whatever, we're going to be right back on top of you. Haliburton is going to look at whoever's there, but come on, let's go. And they're going to do that, and yell at the ref, come on, give him the ball. Let's go. Come on. That's how they're going to operate. And if that means they play in the 110s, great. If that means they play in the 120, are they going to play a game at 130 these playoffs? Probably not in this series, but they'll get to 120 as many times as they can. They'll get to 110 as many times as they can. Obviously if the Knicks blow them up, they might end up in the 90s, and that's when they lose a game. But their best chance of winning is to be at least 115, and shoot for that, and try to get above that and get to 125. Basically shoot for 130, shoot for the stars and land on the moon kind of deal. If shoot for 130, 140, end up with 125, you're better off than you would be if you weren't trying to push it.
And where do you think Tyrese Haliburton is at? He showed flashes in this playoff series, but certainly wasn't first half Tyrese Haliburton, pre-hamstring Tyrese Haliburton. I thought they did a nice job sort of using what was ever there. Siakam was huge in the first 2 games, and then the Bucks adjusted, and Miles Turner stepped up when they made that adjustment. They really do seem like they're, they can sort of pick what they do. They got to make threes. If they don't make threes,
Sure.
they're going to lose. Because they're probably one. I love Naismith, but he's not he's not going to hang 30 on you
Sure.
if he's the guy you're playing off of. So, what do you think? Where are they at in terms of Haliburton?
Yeah, I think Because it's like there's like a small picture and a big picture question. I mean, I think, obviously every time we've brought up the concept of Haliburton scoring or even hinted that we might, Rick has been all over, just jumping on that and being like, who cares? It doesn't matter. Obviously it matters. But on the flip side of that, it's not everything, I think what that has overall done, his sort of approach to that question has made it clear in terms of how he's approached that with us in the media, but also, so publicly generally, but also how he's approached it, I presume, in the locker room, is to say that these playoffs are not about making Tyrese Haliburton a superstar. They're about winning, winning the game however the Indiana Pacers can win the game. And so that I think is wise on a bunch of levels, because it's not just about, Tyrese has to score 30 to prove that he belongs, that he'd be worthy as an all-NBA player, or he's, part of the next branch of superstar, or he can be a guy that carries back, or he can be a Batman or whatever, kind of sort of narrative discussion there is. It's, hey, this guy's got a lot of talent, but he is at his best as a creator. He can score, they're at their best when he can really score, but the idea that Haliburton has to have a 30-point night so he can keep up with Jalen Brunson in the grander discussion of who's the best guard in the league, that it can't be something that they get caught up in terms of how they play. So I think, obviously, like I said, to go back to the Hill discussion, he still had to be a different player. He still had to take on a different role, and he's doing things on the ball and he's doing things off the ball. And there are all these things that he's, having to figure out. I think there's also a bigger picture idea of if he ever wants to have a playoff series like what Jalen Brunson is having, he's got to have some body transformation. He's got to be a bigger dude at some point. He's got to have more muscle, the ability to drive through the lane, bounce off people, and just will himself to buckets in ways that I'm not sure he's quite ready for yet. So instead of trying to do that now just to prove that he can do it, he is, really stepping up the distribution pieces of it. He's, decoying well. He's moving the basketball. He's orchestrating. And he is taking advantage of whatever is there and finding the guy that makes the most sense to find that day. It was Siakam in the first 2 games of the series. He was getting a lot of single coverage, was able to attack that in games 3 and 4, really did a good job of just dealing with the fact that, hey, they're setting 2 bodies at you when it comes to pick and roll. Find, Turner on either a pick and pop or the short roll or the roll away to the bucket, get him set up. And just figure out whatever's there, push and transition like he did in game 6, and just be whatever the game, let you be, whatever the game needs you to be. I think that's what Tyrese Haliburton's doing. I mean, again, he's not having a star turn, basically in these playoffs necessarily. But I think if you look at the whole of what he did in his first playoff series, he did a lot of what the Pacers needed him to do, and really made the right call most of the time in terms of what were the right basketball plays, who were the right guys to focus on getting the ball to, what were the right things to accomplish in each game in that series. I think he, for the most part, did.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Series starts Monday. We'll have plenty more at IndyStar.com. So appreciate you watching and or listening, and head to IndyStar.com for more.